The American Revolution altered women's role in society. Women who ran households in the absence of men became more assertive. Abigail Adams, wife of John, became an early advocate of women's rights when she prompted her husband to remember the ladies when drawing up a new government. Pre-revolutionary ministers, particularly in Puritan Massachusetts, preached the moral superiority of men. Enlightened thinkers rejected this and knew that a republic could only succeed if its citizens were virtuous and educated. Who were the primary caretakers of American children? American women. If the republic were to succeed, women must be schooled in virtue so they could teach their children. The first American female academies were founded in the 1790s. This idea of an educated woman became known as Republican motherhood. As in the case of the abolition of slavery, changes for women would not come overnight, but the American Revolution ignited these changes. Education and respect would lead to the emergence of a powerful, outspoken middle class of women. By the mid-19th century, the Seneca Falls Declaration on the Rights of Women slightly alters Thomas Jefferson's words by saying, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal." Between 1820 and 1860, the growth of new industries, businesses, and professions created a new middle class in America. In families, husbands usually worked as lawyers, office workers, factory managers, merchants, teachers, and physicians. This middle class had its roots in pre-industrial society. It differed from the pre-industrial family in three ways. In the middle class, a family did not have to make what it needed to survive. This meant that men could work in jobs that produced goods or services, and their wives and children could stay at home. Men alone should support the family. A woman's place was in the home, where she took charge of all that went on. The middle-class family was looked at as the backbone of society. Kin and community remained important, but not nearly as much as they had been. A new ideal of womanhood and a new ideology about the home arose out of the new attitudes about work and family. This new ideal, called the cult of domesticity, was founded in women's magazines, advice books, religious journals, newspapers, and fiction. The cult of domesticity provided a new view on women's duty and role while cataloging the virtues of true womanhood for a new age. Womanhood had essentially four parts. Four characteristics any good and proper young woman should cultivate: piety, purity, submissiveness, and domesticity. Piety is the quality of being religious or reverent. Purity is the freedom from adulteration or contamination. Submissiveness is the trait of being willing to yield to the will of another person or a superior force. And domesticity is the trait of being devoted to home or family life. 19th century Americans believed that women had a particular propensity for religion. In the 1820s and 1830s, the young woman was thought of as Eve working with God to bring the world out of sin through her suffering and pure, passionate love. Religion was thought to be a good thing in women, a relief to a restless mind or an occupation, which could be undertaken within the home. The early women's seminaries were under attack for leading women astray from true purpose and duty. It was promised that this would not happen and that they would make young women handmaidens of God. When a woman did not practice religion, it was considered the most revolting human characteristic. Caleb Atwater, the writer of the Ladies' Repository, saw the hand of the Lord in female piety. In 1843, Henry Newcomb, writer of A Young Woman's Guide to the Harmonious Development of a Christian Character, stated the rules and guidelines of how a woman should practice religion. The cult of domesticity was designed for the wives and daughters of the men who made up America's white, middle, and upper-class power structure. Men in this position with stable incomes came to rank one another according to the quality of their homes and family life. Noticeable mostly in urban areas where proper, well-schooled wives became essential status symbols. During the same period, however, many women, married and unmarried, did not have the means to make a home, nor the kind of protection that would permit them to be sexually pure. Free women forced into unseemly work to provide necessities, and of course, enslaved women throughout the South were consigned to the status of fallen, and were often discounted as immoral, undeserving, and fatally flawed. Thomas Brannigan admitted in The Excellency of the Female Character that as sex was sin and sin again, that women, stronger and purer, must not give in and let man take liberties incompatible with her delicacy. If you do, Brannigan addressed his gentle reader, you will be left in silent sadness to bewail your credulity imbecility, duplicity, and premature prostitution. Submissiveness was the most feminine of the four ideals. Men were supposed to be both religious and pure, but neither one was expected. They were never supposed to be submissive. Men were supposed to take action while women were passive and submitted to fate, to duty, to God, and to men. Submissiveness was assured by the clothing the women of the 19th century had to wear. A tight corset closed off her lungs and pinched her inner organs together, while large numbers of undergarments and the weight of her dress limited physical mobility. A true woman knew her place. George Burnup, the writer of The Sphere and Duties of Women, believed that the woman should show weakness towards fate, duty, God, and men. Being submissive was commonplace. Women's place was in the home. Her role was to stay busy with the task aimed at maintaining and fulfilling piety and purity. Housework was one of these tasks. Needlework and crafts were also approved activities, which kept the woman in the home and busy about her task of wifely duties in childhood. The woman was supposed to keep the home a cheerful and peaceful place. This would attract men away from the evils of the outer world. Many books were written to tell women about what their duties were. Sarah Josepha Hale founded the Ladies' Magazine in 1827 to better acquaint young women with their duties. She continued this purpose as editor of Godey's Ladies' Book for 40 years, beginning in 1837. While she was editor of this magazine, she wrote frequently about the notion of women's sphere. Her steadfast devotion of purpose and her unwavering editorial principles regarding issues about women made her one of the most important editors of her time. Both of these magazines educated women on appropriate dress, health, and cooking. They also provided quality literature for women to read, which would pass the time. Louis Antoine Godey wrote Godey's Ladies' Book, which was designed to attract a growing audience of American women. This magazine was intended to entertain, inform, and educate the women of America. At first, the issues focused on the duty of women. As the magazine became more popular, the magazine included book reviews and book works by Harriet Beecher Stowe, Edgar Allan Poe, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Henry Longfellow, and many other 19th century authors. This magazine also included a vast reservoir of illustrations. Today, Godey's Ladies' Book is considered to be the most important resource of the 19th century American life and culture. The American Women's Home, published in 1869 by the Beecher sisters, is remarkable for both its philosophy and practicality. This book was a pioneering work of scientific kitchen planning. It teaches women how to cope with new inventions that were added to the kitchen, and also provides information about healthful food and drink and how to care for the sick and at the home. This is important work of social and food history. Certainly, many privileged women chafed against the restrictions placed on them by the cult of domesticity, while others found within its boundaries some outlets for action and confidence building, particularly through its emphasis on their duty to educate children and serve others. Women who were becoming successful in writing for the ladies' markets discovered not only their own personal voices, but also sometimes a platform for views on public issues. While the women's suffrage movement did not gain sufficient traction for many more decades, women who wrote in sanctioned publications or joined acceptable women's and church societies began to make a difference in the abolition movement, in the fight for property rights, and in women's education. The four women whose works are represented in the following lessons benefited, in some ways ironically, from the domestic ideology that put them into a separate sphere from men. Communities of women, exalted in the home, used the superiority granted them in the kitchen and drawing room to call for moral courage from men in the public realm. As opportunities for expression increased, even within their limited space, women developed a language, a kind of domesticated vocabulary of reform, through which they could reach and support one another. Catherine Beecher and Harriet Beecher Stowe, sisters whose father and brothers were influential churchmen and public leaders, taught together in a school for girls, and through writing made their way into public debates over slavery and women's place. Sarah Peyton Willis, who wrote popular newspaper columns as Fanny Fern, knew the fugitive slave writer Harriet Jacobs well, and Jacobs, who also wrote letters to newspapers and ran an abolitionist reading room, corresponded with Harriet Beecher Stowe. The cult of domesticity, resulting in unforeseen challenges to the system's restrictions, augmented that we call today the power of networking. From inside their separate sphere, these four, as well as many other women writers of antebellum America, became a force to be reckoned with in the nation's largest moral debates.